This is the third part of a 4-part series on the history of Nintendo at E3. If you haven't seen part 1 and 2, you can click here to check those out. Now, however, we look at how Nintendo struggled back against fierce competition to once again become a dominant name in the gaming world. This is the history of Nintendo at E3. By 2006, the GameCube had proved to be a failure. Where the N64 had loosened Nintendo's grips on the console market, the GameCube had let it slip away. The DS and the Game Boy Advance retained Nintendo's handheld dominance, but it was still too early to know if the PlayStation Portable would prove a successful rival. Nintendo needed the revolution, and it needed it now. If it failed, some predicted that Nintendo could well go the way of Sega. Things got off to a rocky start. Unfortunately, it turned out the revolution had another name, and not everyone liked it very much. Nintendo's next generation console was to be called the Wii. The announcement of the name came just 2 weeks prior to E3 2006, and it set the internet on fire. The Pirelli jokes were everywhere, and some in the media wondered if the name would suggest it was just for kids. But the announcement of the name before E3 proved to be a good idea. By the time Nintendo launched its press conference, much of the initial shock had died down, if not all of the skepticism. But Nintendo was prepared for it. They bet that what they had on hand was more than enough to turn early perceptions on their head, and they were right. People had seen the final Wii and Wiimote design at the Tokyo Game Show several months prior, but E3 was all about showing how it would work. The pre-show Nintendo press conference began with Shigeru Miyamoto coming on stage in a tuxedo and bowing to the crowd. Then, a Wiimote in hand, he began to lead an orchestra of Miis like a conductor through a Zelda-themed song. The game was Wii Music, but more on that later. Reggie Fils-Aimé then came out to kick off an overwhelming barrage of new games, new control schemes, and new ways to play. Mario Galaxy was shown to huge audience applause, demonstrating its innovative 3D gameplay and the unique way it used the Wiimote to play. Then there was Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, which used the Wiimote and Nunchuck for immersive first-person shooting. There was also Wii Sports. The game would be packed in with every new Wii and would be the first introduction to gaming for millions of people worldwide. Its combination of tennis, bowling, boxing, golf, and baseball proved to be simple yet remarkably replayable. Perhaps the biggest game of Nintendo's show was The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. The long gameplay demo looked fantastic, especially the use of the Wiimote to swing Link's sword and fire his bow. It would turn out that this long-awaited GameCube Zelda game would also be a launch title for the Wii. Red Steel was another hype launch title. The first-person shooter would make use of the new controllers to swing swords and fire guns. Then there was Excite Truck, WarioWare, Smooth Moves, and even a new Fire Emblem game, later to be called Radiant Dawn. Nintendo wasn't done there, however. Nintendo announced a new, slimmer version of the DS called the DS Lite. The DS Lite would prove to be the definitive DS edition, causing fans to label the older DS the DS Fat. It would also become the best-selling handheld ever made. There were new games for the system too. The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass led an enticing lineup that included Elite Beat Agents, Yoshi's Island 2, the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games, and Star Fox DS, which would be retitled Star Fox Command. By the time people left the press conference theater, they could barely process what they had seen. Nintendo had delivered everything fans could have wanted and more. Just about every major franchise was represented, and both their consoles and handhelds looked fantastic. Ultimately, however, it was all about the Wii's new control scheme. Motion controls had suddenly burst into the home console stage, and the lineups to try them out snaked across the show floor. E3 2006 was Nintendo's. But Sony and Microsoft didn't stay home. The Xbox 360 was already out, gaining a jump on the competition, and it had paid off in remarkable sales. Microsoft also had a great display of software ready for the coming holiday season, and showed off incredible early footage of a game called Assassin's Creed. Sony once again had a bombshell to drop for their conference, but it was one they dropped on themselves. They announced that their upcoming PlayStation 3 would retail for $500 or $600 USD depending on the version. Everyone was shocked. It was effectively $200 more than the Xbox 360. It would prove to be a problem. On the show floor, E3 was a little different in 2006. Booth babes had been banned, and a few now unemployed women even staged a protest outside of the LA Convention Center. It was a decision E3 would later revisit multiple times. Nintendo had a surprise of a different sort awaiting attendees on the show floor. Smash Bros. Brawl would have its first third-party character and would be none other than Konami mainstay Solid Snake.
Showtime!
The inclusion would presage the mass third-party support the franchise now enjoys from companies like Square Enix and Capcom. E3 2006 was a resounding success for Nintendo. Before the event, they were seen as down and out. After the event, no one could stop talking about them. It proved to be the perfect timing too. E3 2006, it was announced after the show, would be the last true expo. From that point on, the event would be nothing more than a small invite-only trade summit. Nintendo had made full use of this last E3, but it would be the holiday season that would test whether their newfound momentum would last.
Nintendo sales are red hot right now. Sales for the popular Wii and the handheld DS game machines are just taking off.
The Wii was a success in a way the industry had never seen. Hardcore gamers fought with people who had never played a video game to get their hands on the new console. Wiis were the holiday item of 2006, and they were sold out in stores across the world. With one piece of hardware, Nintendo had managed to bring in an entirely new market of gamers while simultaneously putting themselves outside of direct competition with Sony and Microsoft. The console wars could be theirs. Nintendo would take its own market for itself. The Wii would continue to sell as fast as they could make them, right up to and for months after E3 2007. Of course, E3 was now officially the E3 Business and Media Summit. It was held in the Santa Monica's Barker Hangar and in small venues nearby. Where once E3 had been a massive spectacle with over 60,000 attendees, E3 2007 was a conservative gathering of 10,000 people. The press conferences were similarly toned down. E3 2007 would see lots of great games, but few big announcements. Reggie Fils-Aimé once again led off the pre-show press conference.
My name is Reggie, and I am happy.
Where once he had been ready to kick ass and take names, now he was merely happy. He had, of course, good reason to be. The Wii was selling as fast as they were shipped, and exploding sales of the DS had relieved worries about Sony's incursion into the handheld market. In addition, Sony's own console launch for the PS3 had not gone as well as they had hoped, largely due to the high price. Nintendo focused its pre-show conference on peripherals for the Wii. In reality, most of the peripherals they had on hand were nothing more than plastic casings for the Wiimote and nunchuck controllers. The lead-off was the Wii Zapper, which looked to be a piece of molded white plastic that held the two controllers in a line so that they could be used like a gun. It was accompanied by a new third-party exclusive, Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles, an on-rails shooter. Then there was a new steering wheel, unsurprisingly called the Wii Wheel. While the product was once again just a wheel-shaped holder for the Wiimote, it was fortunately accompanied by the premiere of Mario Kart Wii, a highly anticipated next entry in the now legendary series. The big peripheral, however, was the Wii Balance Board. Unlike the others, this was more than just a plastic Wiimote holder. It was a sophisticated device that could detect both weight and a person's center of balance. The balance board was paired with the new fitness game Wii Fit. More a lifestyle app than a game, the Wii Fit would provide interactive instructions and workout routine for yoga, strength training, aerobics, and balance. The combination of the board and the software would prove so useful that it would be used professionally for physiotherapy and in assisting the elderly. It also proved so desirable that it would go on to sell more than 22 million copies, making it one of the best-selling console games of all time. Nintendo's show had no other major announcements. On the floor, there were more updated demos of Metroid Prime 3, Corruption, and Super Mario Galaxy for the Wii. Super Mario Galaxy was now really beginning to turn heads with its playful use of gravity and movement. The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass for the DS, already released in Japan, was also attracting attention on the floor. Strangely, Super Smash Bros. Brawl, which had originally been announced as a launch title for the Wii before being delayed, was nowhere to be seen. Instead, Nintendo would build and somehow sustain massive hype for the title prior to its launch early the following year by trickling out new information through its Smash Dojo webpage. With its restricted access and smaller nature, E3 2007 underwhelmed video game fans worldwide. The attending companies had followed suit with presentations that felt timid and bereft of the excitement and surprises of E3's past. And while Nintendo had announced a couple of major titles and a few peripherals, they too had underdelivered on expectations. Nintendo appeared to be a company resting on its laurels, enjoying its newfound relevance as though it had forgotten just how far down it had been a mere 12 months prior. Gamers hoped that Nintendo would show some signs of life at E3 in 2008, but fans had no idea just how bad it could get. Because of the small size of E3 2007, a satellite event called E for All was held in October of that year. The event was back in the LA Convention Center and the public was invited. Only about 18,000 people showed up, but those that did were treated to the first playable demo of Smash Bros. Brawl. That game would go on to launch in North America in March of 2008, a few months before E3 2008. It would of course be a critical and commercial hit. Nintendo's virtual software shop, WiiWare, also successfully launched during that time. Indeed, between 2007 and 2008, Nintendo continued to ride high with huge sales of both the Wii and the DS, which is perhaps why E3 2008 proved to be so disappointing for Nintendo fans. 2008 saw E3 get even smaller. Only about 5,000 people showed up for the event, which was held in a small portion of the LA Convention Center. The booths were all kept the same size, a stark contrast to the bombastic displays of years past. The press conference, like the year prior, also had fewer announcements. That's not to say they had none, however. Microsoft announced its new Xbox 360 dashboard along with a number of solid games like Gears of War 2, Fallout 3, Fable 2, and Halo 3 Recon. Sony too focused on software, including upcoming games Infamous, Killzone 2, Resistance 2, and God of War 3. Nintendo, on the other hand, had Wii Music. The Wii's motion controller music game, which had been briefly introduced the previous year, allowed players to play 8 different instruments along with a number of songs. It was the main game of the press conference, and the show featured Miyamoto dancing about with a Wiimote at his mouth like a saxophone. DJ Ravi Drums was also on hand, giving it his all with a Wiimote and nunchuck. The presentation looked ridiculous. The game also did not look so good. Unlike other music games, there was no wrong way to play, and players had no control over the pitch. The game would automatically make any player motion fit in with the song. The game proved to be dead on arrival, received mixed reviews, and garnering few sales. The rest of Nintendo's press conference was equally embarrassing. Reggie introduced Cammy Dunaway, the new VP of Sales and Marketing, and together they were all about smiles. They revealed the Wii Motion Plus, a new peripheral connected to the Wiimote that improved the motion controls. The new Wii Sports Resort, which required the Motion Plus, would be bundled with the peripheral. Effectively, an updated Wii Sports Resort featured updated versions of previous sports as well as a few new ones. The game was fairly well received, but it was decidedly a casual-focused game. Viewers at the conference wondered when Nintendo would get to the good new Wii games. But Nintendo only had the uninspired Animal Crossing City Folk, which would be bundled with another peripheral, Wii Speak. The new peripheral was essentially just a microphone to allow players to chat in-game. There was also a new DS title, Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars. But that was about it. No Mario, no Zelda, no Metroid, no Star Fox. Fans were left wondering if Nintendo's newfound success among casual players had made them forget about making real games, and about all the gamers who had stuck by them through thick and thin. While Microsoft and Sony were battling it out with great new titles, Nintendo offered only a handful of amusing distractions. There were a few small rays of hope on the show floor. Capcom showed its downloadable games Mega Man 9, which was a return to form for the Blue Bomber. Miyamoto also apparently talked about Pikmin 3 and The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword to invited press behind closed doors. But for most fans, 2008 would go down as perhaps the most embarrassing and awful E3 in Nintendo's history. Fortunately, however, in 2009, both E3 and Nintendo would be back in a big way. The Entertainment Software Association realized that a smaller E3 had been a mistake, and in 2009, E3 was back. It once again occupied the whole of the LA Convention Center, and although not quite as big as E3 at its peak, it was still the real show again. Nintendo had a weaker year between 2008 and 2009, but hardly a bad one. The Wii continued to sell well, and Wii Fit did big numbers. The DSi was also unveiled and released in April of 2009. With larger screens, cameras, and a connection to an online store, it proved a popular item. But at E3 2009, Nintendo had to prove that it hadn't forgotten about its core fans. At its pre-show press conference, it set out to do just that. First, there was New Super Mario Wii. The new side-scrolling game would feature 4-player multiplayer, allowing your friends to constantly troll you while you tried to complete a level. It looked good. Then there was Super Mario Galaxy 2. The game looked a lot like the critically acclaimed first Galaxy, yet in Nintendo's magical way, it was somehow even better. It was also the first numbered Mario game since the NES days. And then there was Metroid, Other M. The game came as a huge surprise. Nintendo had made an incredibly unlikely partnership with Team Ninja, makers of Ninja Gaiden, to create an action-packed Metroid game. It was weird, yes, but also wonderful. The crowd loved it. The game would go on to mixed reception on release, but the idea of a third-person action game with Samus as the lead energized the conference. Wii Fit was back with Wii Fit Plus, which was an upgraded version of Wii Fit with more options and more workouts. They also showed off the Vitality Sensor, a new peripheral that would go on the end of your finger and detect your pulse and other health information. The device would never be released, however. Nintendo would later explain that it was cancelled because it gave inconsistent results and simply wouldn't work for 1 in 10 people. Nintendo also had a slew of other games for the DS, including The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks, Golden Sun Dark Dawn, Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story, and WarioWare DIY. On the show floor there was another surprise. Scribblenauts, the third-party DS puzzle game in which you could summon any object you could think of, became the talk of the show. No one knew it before E3, but everyone knew about it after. With its innovative gameplay, it would become one of the biggest hits for the DS. Nintendo also showed off Monado, Beginning of the World. The game would later be retitled Xenoblade Chronicles, despite being conceived with no connection to other Xeno games like Xenogears or Xenosaga. It also proved to have a tumultuous launch history. It was released in Japan and then in Europe, but it was never localized to North America. Because of the interest in the game, fans formed a campaign called Operation Rainfall to convince Nintendo to release the game in North America. The campaign was ultimately a success, and nearly 2 years after the Japanese release, fans in the West got their chance to enjoy what proved to be a fantastic RPG. Meanwhile, across the show floor, it looked like both Sony and Microsoft were jumping on the motion controller bandwagon. Sony had the PlayStation Move, which looked somewhat similar to the Wiimote, if more colorful. Far more impressive was Microsoft's new Natal technology, which used cameras and infrared scanners to actually detect a player's entire body movements. The technology, which would later be called the Kinect, would prove finicky but fun for a variety of games. Both companies also had a slew of great games to show off, ensuring that even against the Wii's dominating console sales number, neither competitor was looking irrelevant. But for the time being, Nintendo's good times kept on rolling. The year between E3 2009 and 2010 saw 2 more handheld hardware announcements from Nintendo. The DS received another update in late 2009 with the DSi XL. The XL featured a larger overall size, but also larger screens and better viewing angles. Then, a few months before E3 2010, Nintendo released a plain press release stating that the new Nintendo 3DS handheld, featuring glasses-free 3D technology, was in development. The announcement came at a time when 3D was becoming all the rage. James Cameron's new movie, Avatar, had reinvigorated the in-theater 3D experience, and TV manufacturers were scrambling to capitalize on the new 3D craze. Nintendo's handheld came into E3 at the right time. The new 3D tech had to be experienced in person, so at Nintendo's pre-E3 press conference, they brought 100 of them out into the crowd. The technology was stunningly good, and the Virtual Boy this was not. 3D was ready for prime time. And Nintendo had much more. The game of the conference was The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, which Miyamoto had only hinted at previously. The graphical style was adult, like Twilight Princess, but had a few of the more whimsical elements of the Wind Waker's colorful style. Like its predecessor, it would make full use of the Wii's motion controls. These controls presented a bit of a problem on stage for Shigeru Miyamoto when infrared interference prevented the Wiimote from working properly. Despite the poor showing, fans were understandably impressed with the game, and it worked flawlessly in the demos on the show floor. 2010 also marked the return of a number of classic Nintendo series. First was Kirby's Epic Yarn, the first Kirby game from Nintendo in many years. Then there was Donkey Kong Country Returns from Retro Studios. The new Donkey Kong Country proved to be a return to form and received stellar reviews and strong sales. And finally, there was a Kid Icarus game for the first time in 2 decades, coming to the 3DS in Kid Icarus Uprising. The game looked incredible, and it kicked off a roll of 3DS announcements that included Professor Layton, Mario Kart, and Star Fox 64 3D, and even a 3D remake of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. And there was even more. Fans of dancing games found out that Ubisoft's Just Dance 2 was also coming to the Wii. Wii Party would also bring tons of new multiplayer minigames so families and friends could pit their Mii avatars against each other. Mario Sports Mix brought arcade versions of basketball, hockey, dodgeball, and volleyball to the Wii. Disney would also return to Nintendo systems with Epic Mickey, a 3D action platformer in which the famous mouse would have to fix a broken world with his magical paintbrush. Metroid Other M was back with a playable demo on the show floor, along with DS games Super Scribblenauts and Golden Sun Dark Dawn. Overall, Nintendo had a fabulous E3 in 2010 and was the clear star of the show. Fans got everything they could have wanted and more. The company's prospects also couldn't have looked better. The DS and the Wii had been mega hits, and the 3DS looked to continue Nintendo's handheld dominance. Sony and Microsoft were, of course, hardly down and out. Both had more complete versions of the Move and Kinect, and looked ready to jump in the motion control market. They once again also introduced a stream of great new AAA titles. But Nintendo was in the best place they had been in 15 years. Under Satoru Iwata's leadership, the company had regained much of what it had lost. It had become the great innovator, a company that at once defined the cutting edge while bringing in millions of new players. And with the Wii approaching the end of its life, fans began to look forward to the next console. There could be no doubt that it too would be as brilliant and groundbreaking as the Wii and 3DS before it. But the next 5 years would prove that nothing in the video game world is certain.